What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswaves. Hopefully everyone out there had a good holiday weekend, got a chance to eat some food, hang out with the family, maybe do some shopping. But today we do have a bunch of stuff to go over that does actually have to do a little bit with shopping. Of course, Cyber Monday is upon us, and I figured we'd take a look at some of the deals going around. We also have Nintendo picking out new targets, which is an interesting word to use, but in this case, I guess it makes sense for them. And then we also have, well, a game that was revealed that looks very familiar. This one from actually China, taking a look at Sony. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members of the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with NASCAR, specifically about 15 titles in the franchise for video games that are about to be delisted. And this does come back around to that all-digital future, some of the drawbacks to it, but this was noted, we can see, over on VGC, where they say all NASCAR video games being delisted from digital storefronts next month. They mention it's due to the fact that Motorsport Games, the company that handles the rights to the popular racing league franchise, recently sold the NASCAR license to iRacing. Now, this affects roughly 15 games, and a lot of them being console titles. Now, before they're all delisted, it's been announced that these games will undergo a discount in the next month, so I guess keep an eye out for that, all the DLC as well to go along with that. The deadline will be December 31st, so just last day of the year. Now, I'm not a big NASCAR person for the video games or anything, but still, there is that sense of game preservation, yes, because while I'm sure many of these, especially on console, have physical versions dating back 15 years, there is that potential for sometime in the future, 10, 15, 20 years, where we look back and it's like, oh yeah, they're all digital, and now they're all gone. So it does come down to especially racing, but also licenses when it comes to music, likenesses. There's a lot of things that can kind of gum up the works there and have games just be pulled down, most times just indefinitely. Now, if you already own it, you can at least re-download it, but just a heads up, if you wanted to check out one of these years of NASCAR titles, you're going to keep an eye out for that discount happening here in the next 30 days. Also, we did have some more games announced for Nintendo Switch Online, this being for expansion pack members in that Genesis app. We can see this posted up by Nintendo's official account, where they say 3 classic Sega Genesis games have just been made available. That would be Toe Jam and Earl in Panic on Funkatron, Vector Man, and then Wolf of the Battlefield Mercs. Now, I'm, of course, aware of Toe Jam and Earl and Vector Man. Those are the two that I remember the most out of these 3, and Vector Man was something special back then. There was a commercial that I think was just like synonymous with most 16-bit era gamers, where you saw the game and it looked incredible. It was basically, you had the character there, Vector Man, and he's like shooting at the plane. I don't know if any of you remember this, and it just looked insane. It, like, visually speaking, it was so striking just how different it looked from everything around it on the Genesis, or just in general, that, the Super Nintendo, anything, right? It was just, this looks insane. So that is one that I would actually recommend checking out. Tends to be a bit more difficult, but that's how it was with side-scrolling 16-bit games back then. They weren't going to hold your hand, they were going to beat you down pretty good. But still, they're available now, definitely worth checking them out. Oh, and we did have a temporary delisting. This has to do with Square Enix and Triangle Strategy. We've seen this before, but first, we can see their notice here that was posted up, where they say Triangle Strategy is temporarily unavailable to purchase on Nintendo Switch eShop. Those who have already bought the game will be able to download it. They're working on this update, and will be bringing it back to purchase again at some point. Now, they did this with Octopath Traveler, and the reason for this is because Nintendo initially on release has the publishing rights to it. Like, they'll even publish it in certain regions and stuff, and afterwards this eventually expires, and rather than re-up that for being a publisher, Nintendo just says, yeah, okay, go ahead, they just revert back to Square Enix, and in this sense, they have to basically pull it down. It sounds weird, I know, but you have to then relist it as a Square Enix published title on the eShop. I think it has mostly to do with back-end stuff and metadata and that kind of thing, but in this case, it'll be back probably in like the next week or so, especially since they've been very aware of this happening, and it'll most likely just pop up again. If you've already bought it digitally and you wanted to re-download it, you can do so. So this will be a very temporary thing. Should be popping up here soon, honestly, anytime. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Cyber Monday, which, is the Monday after Black Friday. And the thing I've noticed, and I'm sure many people have, especially in the last couple of years, Black Friday and Cyber Monday mostly turns into a month-long thing. As in, Cyber Monday at one point was a big deal. Like, they would typically be discounts and stuff that were separate from Black Friday. But what I've noticed with many of these retail stores, online specifically, that was the idea with Cyber Monday, is they end up being a continuation of stuff that's already been on sale on Friday and then over the weekend. However, some still make it out to be a big thing and be like, oh yeah, Cyber Monday, it's opening now, and you look at the deals and it's the same. But like Walmart tried to do this. It was last night. They're like, oh yeah, Cyber Monday available for everyone, and it's just the same deals. Nonetheless, I did go through them because I'm sure there are people who are maybe holding out, we'll just say, for Cyber Monday and want to do some online shopping. Like Amazon, for example, has an entire listing. IGN tried to go through and just pull a bunch of deals, and I also made a list here as well. Starting at the top, the PS5 and Switch models are $75 off. The Xbox is $50 off. That's like their digital version of it, so rather than $450, it's like $400. I did see that Amazon has the Fire TV 4K and Xbox controller 1 month of Game Pass for $75. So if you're someone who doesn't mind streaming from the cloud, that technically makes, I think, a pretty good setup for maybe another bedroom or just secondary room or something. You can stream and just pull your save data even from the cloud and play right there on the fly. PSVR 2 still marked down quite significantly with Call of the Mountain to $350. Some of the games that I saw here, and these would be physical copies that you can order and wrap, put under the tree, whatever you need to do there as gifts even. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, awesome title, $25. We have Final Fantasy 16, that's $25. Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, one of the nominees for Game of the Year, is $40, along with, hey, Metaphor, same deal there, that one's $50. Persona 3 Reloaded at $25. Rise of the Ronin, this is a good game. It kind of went under the radar a bit this year, but $30. System Shock, that's a physical copy at $20. Star Ocean Second Story R, awesome game here at $30. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin at $20. Bluey, which, hey, all the parents out there, you know this is a good suggestion here for any of the little kids, but $20 on that one. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown at $18. Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope. This is a good one to pick up, especially if you've been waiting. It's $15. And I did throw in something that I think is interesting to at least keep in mind around this time period, because it does end up leaning quite heavily into tech, are some of these mini PCs that work well as emulation boxes or emulation stations that can go underneath your TV or your setup. In this case, the Ace Magician, that one has a Ryzen 7 5800U. It's marked down from $400 to $300, and it's set up pretty well to emulate things all the way up to PlayStation 3. As for me, I did pick out a couple of games. Sonic Cross Shadows Generation was like $30. Avatar, that's the Ubisoft Avatar game, and Resident Evil 4 were both $20, so that was on the PS5. I wanted to pick up RE4 to play in VR since I went through that multiple times on the Xbox, and Avatar, I figured, let's see how that does on the PS5 Pro. Good for the collection even at that price point. I think they were like $20 each. And then Gundam Breaker 4. I've been looking at this one for a while, waiting for that discount. It got marked down pretty well here, but I did link below to what IGN did, which was mostly compile a lot of the deals there on one page to make it a bit easier to go through. And of course, if there's anything out there that you spot, whether it's TVs or other tech or accessories, feel free to leave suggestions down below in the comments, because I'm sure there are people who are still out there really starting up some of their holiday shopping and will be interested. Next up, let's talk about Nintendo and them finding apparently new targets, which I did read that and I laughed a bit, but I was like, oh wait, Nintendo is usually pretty serious. That might actually mean something with them. And in fact, it does. Now, this is something that was reported by GameFile and Stephen Totillo, and we can see this posted up over on their site, where they say, in a recent filing in federal court in Washington State, Nintendo of America said its investigation of Switch modder James Archbox Williams has given it new targets. They include a Switch Pirate subreddits with some 200,000 members, GameFile has learned. So yeah, we talked about this whole situation that was going on, how Nintendo found this person. It was through like repairs and stuff in their database they had for Switch systems that were being sent back and forth between them and Archbox. Now, really in depth, they went to find this person and actually bring them to court. They didn't show up, so it was default judgment. But now, because of this, they're apparently going a bit further. They're seeking an okay from the court to subpoena business records from internet domain companies like Namecheap, GoDaddy, as well Cloudflare, GitHub, Discord, Google, Reddit, to identify alleged associates of Williams. Remember, a lot of this is all tied back to the idea of Switch piracy, as well as selling pirated items. So that's the biggest part here. Is a lot of it is down to storefronts and the trade behind the scenes of trying to sell some of this. So that does kind of get lost in the weeds a bit here. It's still Nintendo going after people who are distributing a lot of this stuff and enabling it, but it does seem for Nintendo to be tied back to a lot of the business dealings with their own intellectual properties that are being pirated. Now, the company made clear that IDing such people will give them an open lane to sue. The purpose of all the requested subpoenas is to seek relevant information that is necessary for NOA to pursue infringement claims. Many of you who watch this show, or have watched it for a while now, know that Nintendo doesn't mess around. I always tell you guys, don't mess with Nintendo, don't mess with Take-Two. Those are like the two obvious ones, because they're petty, they have a lot of time, and they have a lot of money, and they will try to find you as much as possible. And we've gone in depth on multiple cases of Nintendo even like tracking people, like outright, like kind of following them around even, to figure out who they are and, yes, how they can subpoena them, how they can bring them to court. It ends up going down quite the rabbit hole, and there are many stories out there of quote-unquote Nintendo ninjas, but this is just Nintendo really throwing their weight around ahead of, let's face it, the launch of their next system after the Switch was so, like, it was blown wide open at release. Like, we all know this. Paperclip did them in. That was it, right? With NVIDIA and the Switch. In this case, they understand it's still going to be difficult to get around a lot of this stuff. Just in general, when you have a popular system and you have an entire large internet community who wants to crack the thing open, it's hard to kind of evade that constantly. This is just another pillar for them when it comes to that, because, I mean, if you were looking at it yourself, or you might be like, you know, is it really worth going down that rabbit, really trying to push and open this thing up, and then one of the side effects being piracy that Nintendo may look at you sideways over? Maybe not. Maybe spend your time elsewhere. And that's, I think, one of the reasons Nintendo clearly is doing this. Set an example and even set up some fear in the community around their next system, as we are expecting them to probably announce it again in the next 4 months, since they're supposed to before the end of March. This is just them continuing down that path to put people on notice, more or less. And I guess apparently find a bunch of people on the Piracy Reddit that I guess was passing a lot of stuff around. But we'll see as we go along. GameFile seems to have the beat on this one, so I'd keep an eye on Steven Dattilo in case he has any more updates. Next up, let's talk about Microsoft and their Xbox storefront that was supposed to have already launched. And this is a weird one, because Sarah Bond had mentioned that it was going to launch over the summer, actually in like July, and it hasn't happened, which did make their "This is an Xbox" ad campaign seem a little hollow, because sure, you can play the games on your phone, but it's just kind of this, at this point, still rudimentary streaming. It's not really comparable to what we're seeing right now from places like NVIDIA or even Sony. So it's very clear that something else was supposed to have been there, and that more than likely was supposed to be the Xbox store, where you can just buy and play a lot of games there. Well, it does seem like there's a bit of a snag, and we can see this posted up by Sarah Bond, who, after a series of tweets talking about this storefront, said, "Due to a temporary administrative stay recently granted by the courts, we are currently unable to launch these features as planned. Our team has the functionality built and ready to go live as soon as the court makes a final decision." Now, as noted here by The Verge, on October 18th, Judge James Donato granted Google's request for a stay while it appeals its ruling that the Android App Store is an illegal monopoly, which could leave things hanging in the balance for quite a while. We've talked about the core system multiple times here and seen how long it takes for any kind of decision or headway to be made. It takes a long time. But interestingly enough, a Google spokesperson, Dan Jackson, responded, saying Microsoft has always been able to offer their Android users the ability to play and purchase Xbox games directly from their app. They've simply chosen not to. The court's order and rush to force its implementation threaten Google Play's ability to provide a safe and secure experience. Microsoft, like Epic, are ignoring these very real security concerns. We remain focused on supporting an ecosystem that works for everyone, not just two of the largest game companies. So, some shots fired there, I guess, by Google. But I still think there's something there in the background that we don't necessarily know 100%. Most likely there is some sort of barrier or control that's being taken away from Microsoft for their store. It could be as simple as Google wants a percentage still, even though you're not necessarily going through the Play Store. They still want you to run through their processor or something with that Xbox storefront when it comes to payments. That's very possible. Could have to do with intertwining streaming with your purchases on phones. We saw that was a whole thing with Apple at one point. So I think we're actually missing a key piece of information, because if what Google is saying is correct, and Microsoft could just launch the store. I feel like they would have just launched the store, especially since they had that marketing campaign set up and ready to go that isn't cheap. They spent, probably 8-9 months creating the thing, and now they're running it all through the holidays, it seems, to paint a picture of the Xbox and ecosystem that isn't there yet. So this doesn't really add up much currently based on what either side is saying. So I think there's something in the middle that we're missing right now. But I guess we'll see how long it takes the court to figure this out so that Microsoft can eventually launch their Xbox app or their marketplace on phones, because that is kind of a key part, again, to their big marketing push right now and what they want people to perceive Xbox as. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a game announcement that looked very, very familiar in that first minute or so trailer, and then became less familiar when we actually saw extended periods of gameplay for it. We can see some of it here, that being the initial trailer. And that's Light of Motiram. Now, this is coming out on the PS5, iOS, Android, and on PC. Initially, its first announcement was PC, and it looked very much like Horizon, like the PlayStation franchise that's well known at this point, sold very, very well for them. And you see something that has a similar tone, similar sort of art style, direction, world building. And it is coming out of China. This is with Tencent, Polaris Quest, and Aurora Studio. And it's coming out in 2025. It's a free-to-play game. It is going to be focusing on multiplayer, all right? And initially I saw this, and like I mentioned, I was like, ooh, okay, that looks like a Horizon ripoff. But then they started showing some of the gameplay. Like, there's a 16-minute extended cut of it. And it doesn't really look like Horizon then. So my view of this is, it's very clear that a lot of these companies know, because we saw it with Genshin Impact, where it was set up to initially be shown as something that skated very close to the line with The Legend of Zelda, like the Breath of the Wild, and the fan base saw it, and it was a whole thing online, and it was getting thrown around a lot of headlines, and it brought a lot of eyeballs to the game. In this case, very clear that, Light of Motiram, you show that as a Horizon-style game in that initial trailer, and it has a lot of people talking about it. And but then you see the gameplay and it's like, oh, this kind of looks like Ark or Power World or that sort of thing. You're like building up houses and you're doing a lot of crafting, things you don't necessarily do in Horizon, and it doesn't look like it has as much of a focused narrative, for example, as you see Horizon. But there is a multiplayer Horizon game coming, and that seems like something that would actually exist in a similar space as they're trying to pull concurrent players as they go along, and something that looks similar to it. It could make things a bit weird. So again, an odd announcement, one that caught a lot of eyes when it first happened a few nights ago, but doesn't necessarily look like it has as much of a ripoff with the gameplay that's been released. But let me know what you thought about Light of Motiram when it first dropped, like the trailer for it. I did a longer video actually over the weekend, really getting into it, so if you want a bit more information about that one, make sure you check that video out. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, do you think the Switch, so about 146 million, will end up outselling the PlayStation 2 in roughly 160 million? 56% say yes, 44% say no. I think a lot of it will hinge on how this holiday season goes for Nintendo for two reasons. One, I think it's the last major holiday they're going to have with the Switch by itself. We're going to know about the next system by March, as I mentioned, and once that gets announced, that's when you figure people will start taking their focus off of the current Switch. Not everyone, because kids, they'll still have Switches bought for them because are you going to buy them the new, say, $400 system? Or are you going to buy them maybe the $200 or $150 on sale Switch Lite, right? To me, that's pretty clear. But with the holiday in mind, if Nintendo moves a lot of their stock, not only as the last holiday, but also the cheapest we've seen these systems, they're $75 off for a Black Friday. You feel like this will be the point where that price cut will almost get a bit of a test drive and see if it's something that can actually boost sales, because it has been declining for Nintendo, like in general, like quite a bit. So if this is something that can propel their sales upwards, and all of a sudden we come back next year, a month or two in, and they're like, oh yeah, we're well clear of 153, 154 million, then yeah, I think even with the cross-gen period, you will see a creep above 160 million without too much issue. So that's kind of where we are now, and we'll see how all of that turns out. But it's going to be close one way or the other. Even if it does break it, I don't think it's going to be by that much. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Mario, says, people really say DK64 was horrible? I loved it. See, back then, all right, we didn't have like social media and stuff getting thrown around, and it wasn't like immediate, instant, knee-jerk reaction impressions for any games. And it certainly wasn't like a kind of a groupthink at times around certain games. You kind of sat, say, in your bedroom, in your living room, in your basement, just you, with a Nintendo 64, with a PlayStation, a Saturn, whatever, right? Your Game Boy, and you made the call right there and then and there. And you might talk with some of your friends at school, or if they come over to hang out or play games or something. That's kind of it. So it was very much like secluded. And yes, there are probably many people who were sitting in their room like, oh, this is a fun game. And there are probably many people who were like, I hate this game so much for whatever reason, right? Maybe they're even losing their friends a lot in multiplayer. But those are the memories you carry forward. And eventually, yeah, you run into a bunch of people at once that hate DK64 and realize, wow, I might have been the only person back then who really got a kick out of the game. I enjoyed it. I had fun with it, but it's also been a long time since I played it, so I wouldn't mind seeing Nintendo bring it to the service just so I can revisit it and see if it holds up, or if I'm really remembering it through nostalgia goggles. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed the last Newswave, which felt like it was a long time ago last week, I'll leave it right here in a card. Or maybe you wanted to take a trip back to the past with those nostalgia goggles and take a look at some Black Friday ads from as far back as 2006. I took a look at that over the weekend. I'll leave that right below it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.